You, Bob Seeley.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to follow the member for Liverpool Riverside, who makes a very passionate case about public services and her constituency, and I hope to do the same. Mr. Speaker, public services go to the heart of this debate and to the heart of my speech, and like her, I'm going to focus very much on my constituency, the Isle of Wight. It's long been argued that the island needs an island deal which recognises the additional costs of providing public services on an island. Throughout the UK, in order to support islands and isolated communities, the government has generally either provided a bridge, in the case of the Isle of Skye, or has provided increased levels of funding, as in the case of the Scottish Islands Needs Allowance. The Isle of Wight has, to all intents and purposes, Mr. Speaker, been treated as part of the mainland United Kingdom because we have never had additional support, despite the additional costs. In various conversations that I've had with the Prime Minister, he has been generous enough to agree the need for an island settlement. He's done so on visits to the island in June this year, in the House on the record on the 25th of September, and in private conversations with me. So I'm hoping that this is a discussion over content and not principle, but I'm very happy to make either argument to the Secretary of State, and I'm delighted to see him there today. Please, I give way.
Isn't this all part of the problem, which is the very kind of deal-making nature of the conversations that get taken where areas are pitched against each other? Wouldn't he support, say, the LGA's recommendation for an independent body to assess local government need in every area to make sure that everyone gets its fair share?
Yes. Yeah. The intervention, I know of no such case, but what I do know is that the island is the only significant population on an island in the UK that has neither a fixed link nor increased costs. And so I'm not necessarily putting myself up against other isolated communities, but there are specific additional costs which I'd like to mention now, which I don't think which have not been met structurally by governments for the last 50 years. But thank you. I intend to try to show an evidence-based case outlining what those additional costs are to the Secretary of State. But by way of background, there is a wealth of evidence internationally to do with the Isle of Wight or to do with other islands in the UK to show the extra cost of providing public services on islands to the same extent to the mainland. And these multiple surveys have found structural and economic challenges of severance by sea, which is the technical term, including extra costs from forced self-sufficiency and diseconomies of scale. Smaller markets, fewer competitors in those markets. There are 6 and potentially 7 areas that I would briefly like to discuss and to raise with the Minister and to put on record now. Firstly, local government services. The University in Portsmouth in 2015 estimated the additional cost of providing good public services to the same standard as the mainland on the Isle of Wight was £6.4 million. Adjusted for inflation now, that's £7.1 million. 3 factors were taken into account specifically. The additional cost of doing business. It's 30% extra to build a building on the Isle of Wight because of the importation of materials via ferry. Dislocation. Smaller markets, fewer entrants to those markets. And thirdly, what is known as reduced spillover. A dual carriageway in Southampton doesn't help us, and vice versa, a dual carriageway in Cowes doesn't help the folks in Southampton because of severance by sea. We are asking that an agreed formula, and I make this speech with the full support of the Isle of Wight Council, we are working together on this, we are asking that as part of a potential island deal, an agreed formula be devised which recognises these additional challenges, which amount to approximately 3% of the funding that we received. Secondly, healthcare. We have half the population needed for a district general hospital, and yet we need to provide a district general hospital on the Isle of Wight because of the Solent. You can't give birth in a helicopter, you can't give birth in a ferry. We need to provide a decent level of care to provide a district general hospital on the Isle of Wight, but we lack the throughput, the tariffs per head under NHS funding to fund that. Our NHS Trust believes those costs for 24/7 acute care are £8.9 million, for ambulance services 1.9, and in addition for patient travel to the mainland, of which there were over 40,000 journeys last year, of approximately £560,000. So a total of nearly 11 million. Thirdly, local agriculture infrastructure. On the island, 80% of our we are 80% rural, and our rural economy is very important, Mr. Speaker, to our overall economic prosperity. However, again, we are hampered by our dependence on the mainland. For example, under EU regulations, maybe gilded too much by UK officials, an island abattoir became uneconomic. So livestock raised on the island is shipped to the mainland for slaughter, even if it is then imported back to the island. This is both inhumane, or less humane, than local slaughter. It adds costs and fuel miles, and considering we are trying to become carbon neutral, it is an unnecessary waste of resource. There are a few key pieces of infrastructure which would help us enormously. We have an Isle of Wight grain collective, so the idea of forming collectives to solve these problems is one which the island is keen to explore, but we could also do with some grant funding in recognition. And these are an abattoir, tanker and extra milk storage facilities, grain storage and milling facilities, and for vegetables a box erector. Fourthly, housing and the need for exceptional circumstance. Mr. Speaker, the housing targets given to us are, in my opinion, or they meet, in my opinion, the government's own definition of unsustainable. They are bad for the island, and I believe the methodology is flawed. The targets are nothing more than a projection based on historic trends which do not consider our future desire to produce A, housing for islanders, and B, as part of a national agenda shaping a more sustainable and green future. Developments on the island, sadly, are too rarely designed for local people, but for mainland, very often a retiree demand. This forces our youngsters off the island. Secondly, we do not have the infrastructure to support those additional homes because we're an island. Our hospitals full, public services under pressure despite the extra funding, which I'm grateful for, electricity and sewage is at capacity, a third of our water comes from the mainland. The Green Book calculations do not serve the island well. We intend to present an island plan to government which will have a significantly reduced figure, which our landscape and population can cope with, but which supports a local demand. And this, for me, is extremely important, and I would welcome government support and understanding from the relevant Secretary of State and the relevant ministries so we can make sure that we get this through, so that we can help create a sustainable, balanced demographic, a sustainable economy, and start paying into the Treasury. Fifth, Mr. Speaker, on public service, I would like a unique public authority on the Isle of Wight which combines the work of local authority, NHS Trust and CCG. Now, because of the nature of the island, we're quite small scale, social scientists tend to love us because we're an island, so we're easily measurable. This could be, along with areas like Manchester, a role model of how to do much greater levels of integration throughout the country. But we do need a small pot of money and a sense of understanding of how this could work to make a success of it. Lastly, transport. My preference, we have the most expensive ferries in the world. They make very high profit margins, which islanders who earn 80% of the national average have to pay for. My preference would be for government support to look at different models of ownership, but also public service obligations. Before I come to my summation, there may be additional costs to SEN education. However, I haven't wanted to hold up the letter to the Prime Minister, so they may come additionally. Finally, sir, I've hopefully outlined very briefly an evidence-based case that look at the additional costs of public services, and I look forward to following this up with ministers. Thank you.